Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Compliance. This is process manufacturers from across food, beverage, and CPG are really becoming frustrated with digital transformation initiatives, and we wanted to tackle this. We've got a couple of great guests today. So what we talked about some time ago is, and this might be familiar with you all, is some digital transformations never really produce any clear ROI, and others really help companies pull ahead of their competition. The question really exists, has digital transformation lost its way? Is there something else bigger going on? And today's topic hopefully will challenge the way we think about digital transformations to produce better ROI now, and also how it helps prepare for industry 4.0. And this data first approach is going to be at the root of what we're talking about today. Couple of things very quick off the top. We cannot hear you. You can hear us though. We would like to get some questions from you. If you have any, as we go through the presentation, please type those into the question box in your webinar console on the right. After this is all over, we'll send the recording link and all of the presentation materials. We'll share the slides and make sure that everyone has that so you can take it back into your staff meetings, of course, and cover this as you wish. So my name is Aaron Bolshaw, and for those of us joining the first time here for Beyond Compliance, it's a periodic industry update for process manufacturers. The goal, very simply, to bring insights around the market that shape the way you grow your businesses, deliver quality products to customers, and safeguard our brands while improving yields and continually improving. That's just this thing you've got to do in process manufacturing. So the webinar sponsor is SafetyChain. It's the #1 plant management platform trusted by over 1,500 facilities in North America. And we are honored today to be also helped out with Mode 40. We've got Cameron Bergen on the call. And about Mode 40, very briefly, 25 years in IT management operations, Mode 40 bridges the gap between that traditional IT role and that plant floor in agricultural-based operations. Very deep insight and understanding of exactly what's going on major process manufacturing for food, right? And how IT enables that continual improvement. Huge impact on businesses all across North America, from artificial intelligence to data collection, any kind of data you can think of, right? And it really, I think it's interesting, Mode 40 bridges that gap between IT and that OT professional. Talk about data integrations, network architecture, they do it all. So I'm really happy to be continuing our conversation with Mode 40. Now, want to introduce a couple of folks with that. Cam, as we call him here at SafetyChain, has led quality improvement, process improvement, and technology implementations for over 15 years. And he's held leadership positions for multiple protein manufacturing companies throughout this group. As the CEO of Mode 40, he's considered an expert in smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0, IIoT, cloud-based development, and manufacturing plant networks. So Cam, welcome to the big show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, SafetyChain. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And then last but not least ever, you might have read some of the articles he's posted at QA Magazine, Food Safety News, and many others. Roger is our CTO here at SafetyChain and has over 20 years experience in developing innovative enterprise B2B SaaS solutions, from HR tech now to plant management. Fantastic. He actually has a BS in mechanical engineering and 10 patents, including software and aerospace electrical interconnect design. So very cool. Roger, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Aaron. Happy to be here to talk about one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's jump in. There's a problem. Digital transformations not always successful. Some analysis from Boston Consulting really puts it at about 30%. I've seen some others that are lower than that, but your success rate isn't so great. And we want to kind of unpack this a little bit. So I'll just ask, Roger, if you would, to start setting the stage for us, let's get some common vernacular out of the way. What's Industry 4.0, and then what's digital transformation? What's data first? Let's help set the table for our audience. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Industry 4.0, I'm sure you folks have heard this thinking as manufacturing processes have evolved. We're now really in this fourth wave where we're moving kind of from, just plain robotics to using data to make everything about the manufacturing process smarter and more efficient and more effective. And that all starts with the data and using data to drive the business. So that's a goal everybody's excited about, everybody's thrilled with, but it doesn't always work out the way folks expect. So Cam, is that kind of been what you've seen?
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more, Roger. I think you captured it exactly right.
Yeah. Well, let's sort of take a minute and sort of look at these two concepts, digital transformation and this data first thing. So really, digital transformation is about the process of moving a business from, what on one end is traditionally paper-based to a business processes that are driven by information, whether it's the data collection, the process. So that's a great goal. Digital transformation sounds fantastic. Data first is really a methodology to prioritize data so that it's achieving business efficiency and profitability. So this is a whole approach we'll talk through about how to make data achieve all the things that you want out of digital transformation.
Hey, Roger. So we would see too that data first is more beyond the transactional change. It's actually goes into even the business culture and how you actually operate and drive your business on a day-to-day basis. And that's a pretty different distinction between, digitizing, spreadsheets or paper in a traditional sense. Would you sort of agree with that kind of idea behind data first?
Yeah, absolutely. There's many layers of this, and we'll unpack those throughout this presentation on how you think about it, both from processes and culture, and ultimately how those things impact the business. So really, at the heart of data first, it's a data-driven approach to problem solving. And the goal here is to really replace speculation, hunches, and opinions with facts that are obtained through reliable data that everyone agrees on. This is data that we're going to accept as the source of truth. And to a large extent, it sets the goals and priorities for digital transformation to ensure that it's achieving the goals that it's set out to do for the business. So digital transformation, it's almost like data first is putting the framework to ensure that your digital transformation is going to have success. Would you agree with that, Cam?
Yeah, absolutely. And as we'll explore more throughout this presentation, but by using that data first approach to identify, where are the challenges of my business, more specifically, what kind of value and how do I extract that value from it, will be the launching point to the outcomes that you want your digital transformation to experience. And that's, we feel, is a pretty critical step to the difference between the success rate and failure rate that we just sort of looked at with the BCG data.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to back that up with some good stories from the floor here. So let's start by just kind of looking at digital transformation and what are some of the pitfalls. So first of all, digital transformation, the basics. Fundamentally, it's about having the data, collecting the data. So it's looking at like, how are we going to collect the data, and where are we going to store that data, and how are the people going to access it, and who are we going to share that information with? And so there's a lot of mechanics involved in that part of it, but it doesn't really answer the fundamental question of like, how are we going to make it actionable? And that's really this part of it. This highlighted part here is where the digital first approach is really focused. Okay.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Roger. And the piece that we continuously see the gap in implementations is that action step, and that's what we really want to hit home today with everyone is how do we get to that point where that's being realized on a day-to-day basis with these projects, with these implementations.
So, I mean, let's look at some of the challenges. The first thing to note is that the data by itself doesn't create business value. It has to have a purpose. You have to know, why am I collecting this data and what am I going to use it for? What problem am I solving? And because what happens a lot is, to some extent, digital transformation can introduce complexity into an organization. You now have all this technology that you have to manage, and we've all lived it. Right? Technology is great. It's phenomenal when it works, and when it doesn't, it's frustrating and complicated. So if you're not getting a real clear outcome, you've spent a lot of money and added a lot of complexity to your organization, and it may not pay off. And so that's what we got to make sure, that we don't spend all this time and energy and not get value for it. And then one of the things that I think people forget is that like data, a bunch of sensors by itself collecting data isn't going to tell you the full story. You've got to combine that with a human data element and bring all that together. And then finally, the collecting of the data is just the beginning. The real value is in what you're doing with that data, the analytics, and what it's telling you, both now and in the future as well. So Cam, why don't you give us a little of your experience with this?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a great place to sort of reflect on a lot of implementations. And one that certainly always came to mind is I think everyone can relate to yield improvement projects. I mean, in this space, yield is probably the one metric we can say translates across the entire industry, regardless if you're making pepperoni pizzas or chicken wings. And one of the implementations that really hits home here is working with a large multinational organization, very successful results, very successful company. Get into one of their plants and very high level said, look, we want to improve the yields of this line, and it's just not happening. So, walk me through what you've been doing. And so what's your goal? Well, overall goal is to improve the yields of the line. Okay, good. Got a metric? Yeah, metrics were total line yield. Okay, that sounds familiar, sounds good. What's the problem? Problem statement clear. It takes too long to aggregate defect results. We're collecting them manually. There were clipboards at the time and clickers actually, and that was then aggregated at the end of the shift, which was then aggregated into a spreadsheet, which was then produced into the next day's report. Okay, so I can see, logically, we need to improve that. So what's the project? Well, it's digitize the defect collection process. An app. We're going to get an app. And that always gets people excited. The app will solve everything. So after a couple of months, they digitized the process. They got training to the defect collection staff. They were collecting it, and those charts never looked better. Absolutely beautiful charts produced at the end of the shift. Everyone's happy. Did they save a bunch of time? Absolutely. Did they get the yield improvement result they were looking for? So when we asked that question, they said, no, that's the problem. We did this, but we didn't get it. And when we dig into the data and we say, okay, so how are we actioning this information? Like, what new results are you creating? What new actions, what new steps, what new problems are you uncovering? That's where you could hear that pin drop moment. Well, our charts are done quicker. So, okay, no, that's okay. That's a great step. But what was happening is no one was using the data in a specific way to drive that ROI result. What's that one thing we can hang our hat on? And so in particular, this case, they needed that human data, pitfall number 3, actually translates a few of these, but pitfall number 3, we needed a human data, engage the line employees with this new real-time information collection system that says, hey, something's happening right now. What's going on? This meat's just too hard. It's too hard to cut right now. Oh boy, I should go upstream, talk to the main break. I should talk to the cooler, see what's happening. Is this going to continue on for another hour? Within that type of action steps, that's where the ROI started to drive. So after identifying which the employees, working through that human data piece combined with the quality data, prioritizing 3 top actions, did they end up seeing an overall improvement in their yields? Absolutely. But it wasn't until they engaged the human data component that they actually ended up with the results. So that's one, and I'd love to tell you that I've only seen it once, but unfortunately it's an example of where that feedback cycle between performance and the line is so critical, and it touches a lot of different steps. So that's that's just one kind of top of mind story that comes to me when I think about the pitfalls of digital transformation.
Yeah, Ken, that's a great story. Can you give us a little more background of like what I didn't quite track what the problem what was the problem at product?
So yeah, specifically in this case, like again, you've got a lot of good defect data. So it says, hey, we've got miscuts. 15% of the products got miscuts. So that's
this is a meat cutting process.
In particular, is a meat cutting process.
Having miscuts. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so now that we're getting to the information faster, what was required, the problem in the project was then sharing that information with the front line, collecting that human data component, adding in their experience, their information in a real-time setting, and saying, hey, particular, hey, why is this going on right now? And it's literally, in this case, was just a conversation. The app triggered the event that said, hey, you've got a yield problem. Once we started actioning that event and taking it to the part of the line in which case that the problem was happening, in this case, it happened to be actually removing sirloins from a pork loin, and engaging the person with what the challenge was that was creating that defect, it then informed actually what was happening even further upstream. And so purely just digitizing the defect component was not nearly valuable to anyone until they started to engage the people in that part of the project.
Got it. So an upstream change was the secret to making the cutting process more efficient. That's and that's a great example. Kind of stuff we see all the time. Let's dig in a little bit and let's contrast sort of the digital transformation, just the mechanics of like we got to get the data, to how do you approach it from a data first standpoint? So really the fundamental question you should be asking at the beginning is, what problem am I trying to solve? You should have a very specific problem or goal or thing in mind. And then the next question is, what data is going to help me understand that problem? And then going on to looking like, okay, what are the sources of information to get to? And until you've sort of answered these 3 questions, doing investing in any kind of technology is kind of premature, because you can have lots and lots of data. I know this in my own one. I mean, I use data all the time. I've got a lot of systems. I mean, my system spits out data like you wouldn't believe. But most of it, if it's not germane to a particular problem I'm working on solving, it's just can be noise at times. Useful. It's nice to know you have it because it might be helpful in the future. But really, if it's not the data that I need to solve the problem, it's not helping me. So that's really where we start. What problem am I trying to solve? What data is gonna help me understand that problem? Cam, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Roger. Like one of the things I commonly share with people is and I'll reflect on sort of the example of the last story here. be cautious about having a metric that's too high level. So improve my overall line yield. That's fantastic. Keep that. That's an outcome of something that's going to happen. But make sure that you're also narrowing in on what is the one thing or two things that I know specifically I want to change, and that really drives to what problem am I trying to ultimately solve here. And hang your hat on a result of something very specific. Now, it will inform and change things at a higher level, but be careful not to sit back and say, without identifying clearly what change I'm going to instrument here, you will end up in a position where you will not know or be disappointed in the results you're going to get. And that's one sort of word of wisdom, I think, when you approach these types of changes. You really want to keep that in mind.
Yeah, good point. And sometimes the first problem to solve is just to figure out what are the problems I have. I mean, it's not always super clear where to begin. You may want to say like, okay, yeah, I want to improve my yield, but I don't know where to begin. I don't know what's preventing my yield from being better. And so sometimes it's getting into specific tools and methodologies, like OEE or SBC are really tools that can help you uncover the problems that you didn't know you had. It's the don't know what you don't know problem. Start there. What is the thing that's going to tell you what you didn't know? And then you can come back in a later phase and go like, okay, now we know this is a problem. How can we use data to solve that?
Yeah, so you hit on a really good point here in terms of not always knowing, and that is very common where we know we've got some issue and it's probably a downstream issue, and we don't really know what the root cause is at that point in time. And an example comes to mind is recently a plant implemented a fairly large, it was about $1 million capital project to implement a water jet cutting machine, portioning machine into their line. Had some good understanding of the machine level metrics that they looked at, such as head count change, machine uptime, very very discreetly focused. Fast forward 90 days or so post implementation, everyone was trained, every the contractor was gone. CFO was asking the question at this time, why are we not seeing the return on that line? This line in particular was portioning poultry cuts. And so why aren't we seeing a return on that line like we thought we would? It was supposed to be immediate. We did get the head count. Okay, yes, that's good. We have machine uptime. Okay, perfect. We've got the recipes that it's cutting. It's accurate to the degree which the project was set at, so that's fantastic. But my dollars and cents at the end of the day aren't working. What's going on? Okay, so we take a look at what's happening with the line. We say, look, all machines typically in these types of installations have dependencies. And those dependencies are both upstream and sometimes downstream of the machine in order to extract its full value. So what data do you have? Well, in this particular case, we said, good, we got some good SBC data around our quality controls downstream the line, perfect. Unpack that. Fortunately, it was really easy to identify because I happen to be using a SafetyChain system. And so we unpacked, okay, we've got a quality data here. We look at the quality data before and after the implementation of the machinery. And lo and behold, there was no change. There was an anecdotal understanding that we probably will have a much higher degree of accuracy. So something else is going on. So we identify using the data we had that we have a problem. But that problem informed us that, look, if there's no change in quality, which isn't a bad thing, but that's not what our target was, and the machine is operating exactly where it was supposed to based on its machine level metrics, then the problem must be upstream. And so once the organization looked at the upstream processes, they identified that the individuals who were placing product on the line had not been informed about the machine's requirements for even distribution of the meat on the line. And so it was actually retraining the individuals. And again, here you have a process problem, not a people problem. Joe on the line was just doing what Joe knows how to do, and that's what he's been doing for the last 10 years. But the metrics around the machine didn't capture the dependencies. And so in this case, didn't have the data. That's okay. We looked at what we did have to inform us about where we needed to likely go look and start capturing. And now the input and output data for the machine is being captured, both from a SBC perspective, and they're actually able to manage it at a more discrete level. So this simple change and simple investigation and project, was a net result of 300,000 in margin per shift for this company, which is absolutely fantastic. So that's for me a good example of where sometimes you just have to start looking and seeing what the story tells you to unfold where you're going to ultimately need to be addressing.
Great point. So a lot of times it does start by taking a look and kind of answering these questions, looking at the data you have, and then asking questions about how does this compare, between locations or between lines? How does your data, are you seeing differences? Are you seeing between operators? Are you seeing it between shifts? Or how does it correlate to your outcome? I mean, in your last story, you said like, hey, we had an expected outcome, we didn't get it, why not? And that's what really drives this whole question of like, okay, you have the data, now how do you start using that data to uncover things and to ask why, and to sort of benchmark and compare. If you have data for a while that you've been collecting, great, you can sort of benchmark against that and then see like, okay, are we seeing changes? But you can also do these kind of comparisons between different types of things. I think we saw that in that last point. Anything here, Cam, before I jump forward?
Yeah, quickly. I love the tip. Right? Is why shift one better than shift two, and I don't know that I've been to maybe more than a handful of facilities where they say, look, my shift two line, my shift two always outperforms my shift one, or even more consistently outperforms my shift one. There's always the top 10 reasons, why, but I can tell you that by identifying and actioning those results, you can do it because we've seen it. One example, again, back to yields as a performance metric, we saw an organization completely digitize and create, a real-time monitor and alert system for their yields. It happened to be a big differentiator. They were struggling as an organization, needed to make some big steps. And in this example, shift one always outperforming shift two. And sitting down, having a conversation with the shift two floor manager and supervisors as a group, we said, look, guys, like let's dig into why is shift one always outperforming? Is there something there that's telling us? And they're not specifically the metric they were using. They were using yield performance and number of changes made as their metrics for improvement, both good. However, in a real-time scenario, the time between, hey, there's something wrong with your line, go fix it, and resolution, that money lost, you'll never get back. And in this case, shift one, their reaction time happened to be better than shift two. And so we focused in on that and said, guys, this next shift, let's use it as a use case, use it as a test case. We know what shift one's reaction time is. You've got to beat it. You've got to beat it. And throwing down the challenge, that was the first result in that shift two's history that they'd ever beaten shift one. And it was simply by meeting a better reaction time, which created a good, back and forth between the two for a long time. But that's some good camaraderie that you really need to have in these kinds of scenarios. So I love the shift one is better than shift two, and answering it with the data answer and not a cue card response.
Yeah, that's great. So just by reducing the response time between you were aware of like, hey, there's a problem, and then you went to fix it, just shortening that up brought real difference. That's great stuff. Yeah, and like unlocking the ROI. I mean, that's the point of the data, is to figure out how to get return on this investment. And so, you know, whether it's finding gaps in the data, benchmarking, looking at root cause for performance and variability, and just prioritizing, like, you know, find the low-hanging fruit and to have some you know, have some data to say, like, yeah, this is the number, this is the lowest hanging fruit, this is the thing we need to tackle first, because this is where we're going to get the biggest return for our effort is. All really key things to that you learn from the data, and it starts with sort of this data first. Let the data inform your decisions. And as Cam's mentioned all along here, there's two kinds of data. There's machine data, and there is human data. Now, by human data, I don't just mean like, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years and this is my experience and blah, blah, blah. It's not that. It's data, it's information that is uniquely captured by a human, because there may not be a sensor that can tell you, you know, off the cuff, like, how does this compare to that? Or there may not, or it may not be cost effective to do something, you know, that happens periodically. But sometimes those pieces of data that combined what's happening with why it's happening in a way that's reportable allows you to pull together metrics and bring them, you know, it's critical to sort of bring both of those together in a way that you can get analytics out that tells you, yes, you know, we see our machine is down, you know, 12.2% of the time, and based on input from the folks, you know, the cause of that is, you know, we're not having proper setup time. We're late in our startups or something. So, Cam, where do you see this?
Yeah, I think we've been, you know, all along, it's important not to forget that human element. And that is a missing step that we see common in implementations, is the disconnect and engagement between people actually performing the processes and, you know, project team. Often maybe a meeting room somewhere working on project responsible for implementation, connecting in, you know, and bringing it directly to the people who are executing it as part of what you're doing is a critical stage that we often see implementations happening, you know, for the sake of implementation, or, you know, speed is king, so timelines are more priority. Take that extra week if you can, you know, and make sure you're engaging, because you will find, at the very least, most likely, opportunities you didn't even think of, and they may not be able to happen on day one, but it'll inform you what post your implementation, what maybe you should be doing as a phase 2 or a phase 3 to continue to extract as much value you can out of your investment.
Absolutely. At SafetyChain, we talk a lot about what we call the long tail of data. And what this means is there's a lot of data that, like, your operational data that you're collecting, like, every second, every minute, you know, every millisecond even. So it's high volume, big data, right? High volume, high velocity data. And that's critical important. A lot of times those are things that benefit from automation, or things are just capturing that data. But that data may be dependent on other things that happens more rarely and more inclusive. A super simple example of this is you may be doing temperature checks on your oven, you know, every second. You've got an automated system that's capturing this data and you're plotting it. But where are you tracking and storing the data that says that you calibrated that thermometer once a month? So that's a critical piece of data that there's probably not a sensor for. But if you know, when an auditor comes in and wants to, like, okay, you know, have you maintained your temperature specifications? Great, you show them that data. And then how do you also show them, like, and this is where we conducted the audit, or this is where we did the calibration, and then it passed, and all that comes together in one big picture. So key part of the overall perspective of data. as you're looking at it.
Yeah, and
So-
guys, this is great. I knew we'd dip our toes into big data at some point, right, Roger? So thanks
Yep.
for going through that. And Cam, I'm loving the stories. You've got tremendous experience, and you hear the woes in the boardroom so much. I wanted to take the temperature of everyone really quick. We're going to start up a really quick poll. We're just going to ask a quick question to just understand where everyone's at. So I'm going to launch a poll in front of you. You'll get a chance to select one of the answers. Just want to know what best describes your current state of digital transformation. Nothing at all, no initiative plan, just kind of, hanging out, doing good work. Currently planning something, right? You're in the planning phase of starting an initiative for digital transformation. Maybe you're in the middle of implementing something. You're in the thick of it, or completing it, maybe. And then always you should always, of course, take an assessment after a digital transformation. So give a couple more seconds to have everyone answer this very quickly. We'll close the poll, and I'm curious what folks will say here. Let's see. I'm going to launch this and share it, and I'll just ask Cam, what are your thoughts on this? Anything stand out to you?
No, I think this is, if you would have asked me ahead of time where I thought the bulk of responses are going to be in this space, we see a lot of organizations, setting their strategic planning at, the next 3-5, need to start thinking about this, need to get to a place at the end of 3-5, and so, the planning stage is most certainly where we see a lot of the industry at right now. So this is, for me, this hits home with what we see on a broader perspective.
Yeah, it also the bulk of the folks on the phone here are going to get massive use out of the information that you guys are given, because again, I think the true impact we want to have with Beyond Compliance is really enabling that betterment of your process. So if you are currently one of the folks currently planning a digital transformation initiative, yeah, I hope you're at this point really looking at data first approaches, and we're going to get into that a little bit more here. If you want, Roger, if you would reshare, I think what you want to do here, or I can pick us up where we left off as well.
Let's see here, share. So
there you go. We're live. Thanks.
Is it shared again? Okay.
Got it.
Great. Yeah. So let's go forward, and so let's take a look at why this approach. I mean, as if we haven't already made that abundantly clear, but let's look a little more data behind it. Let's look at the data behind it. The first, one thing to think about this is to sort of approach this, like a CFO, right? It's where are the dollars, where's the money going in and out. In the data world, we talk increasingly about data is the new oil. It's like, this is what's going to drive the value of your organization. The information that you have is what is going to differentiate you from your competitors. How you're utilizing your data, how you're thinking about data, and that's really, kind of the CFO approach, because this is what's going to differentiate our profitability and our ability to win in a competitive situation. So, how is this driving our total cost of quality? And then thinking about data sometimes as an investment, like we're going to invest in this and we're going to get dividends out of this data down the line. And look, if you listen to some of the Cam stories he's had, where like they'd done this digital transformation, they had been collecting the data, but they weren't getting the value. And then until they stopped and they said, like, okay, we have a problem, we need to solve it. What did they do? They went back and they looked at the data they'd been collecting, and that's what led them to the solution. So sometimes it's a bit of an investment. You gather it, you collect it, and then it's going to pay dividends down the line. And really to think about the data as an asset. Now, granted, sometimes the data in particular forms, there's a certain liability around it. I know in our case, we have customers that say, like, no, after a certain period of time, we want to delete all this data because we don't want it to be a discoverable record if there's ever a question in the future. my IT side makes me cringe at that. Like deleting data, that's like, dumping oil. But what's all the potential value that we may be losing in that? But absolutely, we get that. It's a double-edged sword. And then this thought of like, particularly in our industry, it's easy to think about buying equipment, right? That's such a tangible thing. It's easy to think about like, hey, I'll buy this new machine. It's faster, it's better. But I think this shift and this transformation to also think about software, to think about information and data, like how can we make the things that we have just go better, go faster? Or as I'm buying this new machine, how do I think about the data I'm going to need to make sure that we're getting the right kind of value out of it? I've bought a new water cutter, but all by itself, that's not going to maybe deliver the value without the right data to understand how to tune and shape it. Cam, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that kind of come to mind. If anyone's ever asked themselves a question, how is my executives thinking about this as a project, or I need to do a business case and I want to hit the right, tone with what I want to suggest. The most critical piece that people are thinking about at that level is show me the 5 things that are going to change and how much money is it going to take and how much money is it going to generate. And anything from there at an operational management level, there's maybe 100 things you have to do to make that a realization. But we've got to come at it from not the perspective of, well, it's frustrating for me to manage every day, and this is going to help me manage things easier, help my supervisors easier, and help me manage my multi-plant easier. At the executive level, that's important, but that's not the first tone. We see most business cases failing because they go through how the chaos is going to get a little bit better, as opposed to the pure fundamental of how's the business going to get better. And that's a kind of simple, but at the same time, it's a critical way of looking at it. And when we see the shift today from an equipment perspective, we see a shift where people are looking at data and information. The most mature organizations will look at it as it's equivalent to utility. It's equivalent to power. If I don't have electricity for that machine, it's not going to run and operate the same way I do. If I don't have the data that I need from that machine and it's the rest of that processes, it's not going to do what I need it to do. And they're just starting to about near the same level of appreciation, because you need both. You need the fuel in the tank to make everything run. Buying the new car is fantastic. Parking on your lot and not going anywhere doesn't do much. So it's data sort of that fuel that keeps the accountability around everything. Also is used to inform what needs to be happening next. And that's a couple of things I think about when you put your executive's hat on for a second and say what's important to them.
Absolutely. And as you're thinking about a data project, how to package that in the terms that your CFO is going to get excited about. And in fact, if you look at CFOs, this is some data that looks at CFOs and how they're thinking about different projects. And the first thing to note on this chart is you've got your orange things, which are sort of data digitization types initiatives, artificial intelligence, cloud, analytics. And then the gray ones are other things that are in there that they're thinking about. And so they're trying to prioritize data versus other things I need to do. And so, looking at that, a lot of times that the data can be, less difficult, less time consuming, and return value at a much higher degree. If you can make the machine you have be more efficient by just knowing that one thing you're not doing right, you can, it can be far more cost effective than a whole bigger investment. And also, really thinking through data as a the longer term value of data. There's a bunch of cases for how to think about data and valuable data. And the first thing to know, we haven't talked a lot about AI and machine learning. And because really those are tools that take advantage. Once you have a large pool of data, then you can begin to talk about AI and machine learning, because really the data that you've collected is what trains your AI and your machine learning about what is a good thing, what does a good thing look like, what does a bad thing look like, and you feed it the data from what you've done in the past, and that trains it for the future to how to think about, like, oh, when I see these kinds of things, that's bad, or if I see these kinds of things, it's good. So data becomes the tool to train for the AI and the machine learning in the future. And it drives competitiveness. You know, we're increasingly seeing, you know, data being the differentiator between, you know, one business winning and another business. And today, that differentiation is a competitive advantage. But this is becoming more and more prevalent every day. So tomorrow, it's going to be more about, like, you know, if I'm not doing this, am I just not going to be competitive if everyone else is doing it? So today you get the benefit of, like, if you're doing it, if you're an early adopter, you're ahead of the game. Tomorrow, if you're not doing it, you're going to be behind the game and trying to play catch up. So, yeah, I mean, these are just some of where we see how we need to start thinking about the data, and you know, and how companies are starting to think about, you know, like the data and, you know, what they're going to do with it in terms of an AI. And a lot of companies are just sort of early and sort of thinking about how they're going to formulate their AI strategy. So if you don't have that figured out today, that's great, because that's actually not the first step. It's getting through some of these data first, data transformations are the starting point. Cam, what?
Yeah, when I think about, you know, talking about what those sort of phase 2s, phase 3s kind of look like, we're sort of getting into that more advanced toolkit where we want to leverage things like AI, we want to leverage things like machine learning, you know, to start extracting additional value out of it. But by the time you've walked into that stage of your project where you're thinking, yeah, I need AI next, like that's my next thing. You know, my first point of advice is that data should have already informed you very specifically, you know, what AI is going to solve for you and how it's going to solve it better, and more, and the value that you're going to generate from that implementation on those, you know, 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 or 10, whatever they are, items is an absolute must. And so again, we're walking through how to, you know, start with that implementation, and regardless of what phase you're at, is asking all those right questions along the way. And so, you know, when you want to get into something like AI, something like machine learning, you must have a very mature process where the data is being collected, the right data is being collected, because you've already defined, you know, what that picture looks like. That's harder to do, and most people will jump into a challenge where they digitize what they're doing, but the idea behind, you know, the other 5 or 10 or 20 variables that they need to implement AI appropriately, they're missing, because they jumped into it too early. They solved a discrete problem, jumped into it too early, and the implementations at those stages typically fail. So you really have to make sure you've got a mature process set around data collection before you're going to take a journey into that next phase.
Very good. Well, let's talk a little bit about here the data first culture, because data first is as much a cultural transformation as it is a process. And one of the things that we find that really successful data first approaches almost start with leaders modeling the thinking that they want to have. You know, if leaders are putting a premium on the people that come to the table with solutions or questions or things that are numbers based, that are data driven, they're rewarding and they're saying like, yes, information and data is important. And it's empowering the folks that go out and get the numbers and find the data to say like, look, this is the way to move forward and to drive solutions. This is super critical, I think, in the switch between maybe the culture that is said in the past, like, well, we're more of an experience-based. You know, if you've been doing this for 20 years, you know, you're gonna get the first opinion or the first attention paid to your solutions. And not to discount that, but are those given equal weight with the new guy who showed up and said, I've ran the numbers, I've done the analysis, and it's telling us something different here. So leaders have to model that in order to start to drive this culture of data first. Is that what you see, Cam, as you work with companies?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on this, Roger. It's the way we like to sort of describe it is and test is, you know, are you presenting the cue card response? Are you presenting the template that you walk through? And or is the new guy in the room who maybe doesn't know anything, but brought you the numbers to suggest to back up his point? Do you take the minutes, the seconds, the hours to listen the same way you do to the 25-year veteran, whose gut is probably also equally right, but do you approach it the same way? And the answer needs to be yes. And so that's a pretty critical component when organizations who've truly adopted a data-first approach.
Absolutely. Kim, you're often that new guy because you're coming into a company, they brought you in and say, we've got a problem we can't solve. You're not going to get 25 years of experience in a week. So you have nothing but the numbers, and you know, yeah, you're counting on that leadership to back you.
Yeah, absolutely. We often like to joke that, you know, we're okay being the idiots in the room. I'm totally fine with asking the dumb questions. Yeah. They're informed by information, but certainly I am used to the eye rolls and the tisks because the information might be suggesting something different. But the proof's in the pudding when dollars are in the pocket at the end of the day. Typically people are very happy about those results. But yeah, you're exactly right, Roger.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the things that's critical on data first is to get buy-in from everybody. And it's going to be a challenge, but you know, to get everyone to agree, like, hey, we're going to take this data approach to decision making. You know, we're going to put a priority on data. I mean, one of the things I know in my space, Google is notorious for being data driven. If you show up in a meeting and you have a suggestion and you don't have data to back it up, you might as well not have even come. It doesn't matter how right you were, if you're not approaching it from a data-driven perspective, you don't get a seat at the table. Data gets you a seat at the table. And so that's key. Part of it is agreeing on like, what's the data we're going to collect, and are we collecting the right data? Because you don't want people to come in and just go like, you didn't collect the right data. You know, so buy-in early is going to prevent people dismissing your findings because they somehow didn't like your data. And it avoids those challenges in the future. And there can be some, you know, it's a culture shift to get folks to buy in to this way of thinking. But the value's there. I'm gonna kind of jump on here. And one of the things to note is celebrate surprise. So if your data doesn't surprise you, you might be doing it wrong. Be ready for the data to challenge the conventional wisdom. Now, sometimes it's great. Sometimes the data is going to come in and it's going to tell you, hey, that hunch you always had is right. And that's great when that happened. And it's even better to like, hey, I always thought this, but I could never prove it because I never had the data. And that's phenomenal. But one of the things we suggest is don't just do digital transformation or data first to prove you were right, just to prove the thing that you always suspected was the case. Be ready to be wrong and be humble enough to like go like, yeah, gosh, we didn't see that, or we didn't notice that before. But now that we have enough data, it becomes apparent. and I want to talk here about the criticality of being a consumer of data. So many folks approach our system like, oh, I got to get a report. I got to get this onto a paper format that the executives are used to seeing. And that's great. I mean, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But my approach is like data, the true insights rarely never fit on one page. If you really want to understand, or you know, it's great to get the monthly report and everything, that's great. But if you're really looking for problems, I encourage that everyone needs to be ready to interact with the data and to be able to drill down and explore the data. Because data is not just for the analyst, it's not just for the QA manager, it's not just for the compliance manager, it's for everybody. It's from the guy on the front line to the C-suite. There is data relevant to every single one of those roles. And whatever you're using needs to make data accessible, because we're all data experts now. We are all data analytics users every single day. If you're looking at the weather, or you're checking a stock report, or you're following your sports team, or you're doing any one of the hundreds of things that we all do every day on a cell phone, you're using analytics. But what you may not know that because you're using really good software that's packaging that information and helping to highlight the data, so you're not having to pour through raw data. You can see it packaged in a way that highlights the things that are most important and relevant to you. You know, there's a cloud on my weather app that's telling me something about the data. Cam, I'm cutting you a little short here because I got a story I really want you to tell in the few minutes we have left, because this is such a powerful, when I heard this story, it's like, wow, this really drives home everything we've been talking about. So Cam, why don't you tell us a little about the 300 motor story?
Yeah, the infamous 300 motor story for sure. Yeah, so I'll tell a bridge version here because I want to respect everyone's time. But you know, this working through a project was a new plant design, new processing facility, meat processing facility, primary. And the goal of this project was, you know, they wanted a Joule in there, a Joule plant that could be respected at a world stage, world leading design. Anything leading edge was acceptable. Bleeding edge, maybe not quite yet, but leading edge. Let's take best practice of other industries and put them into a meat plant, not best practices of meat plants and put them into a meat plant. And was a completely different way of looking at things. You know, the existing facility is quite old, cobbled together, and as such, its infrastructure, it had completely a hydraulic-based motor system. There was a total of 3 electric motors within the entire plant. That's it. But one of the things that was frustrating for everyone was the risk for material, the infrastructure requirements for doing a new facility with hydraulic motors, just that breaks the idea of a world-leading design. So I said, yeah, we're going to convert everything to electric motors. Okay, that's fine. New facility was over 100,000 square feet larger than the current plant, so they went from that 3 electric motors to 300. Now, the whole project went on the rails at this point because operations was throwing flags, maintenance was throwing flags, even at the executive level, everyone was engaged, but because this was a tremendous concern, it typically took 2 hours of downtime in the current facility to replace a motor, which sounds astronomical, but protect the area, it's deal with the meat, put it aside, get the right tools there. If there's any welding that has to happen, you got shrouding, you got all the headache to deal with it to make sure that food is still going to be continued safe. And so they're thinking, whoa, we're going to so many motors in the plant now. The plant's so big, the potential for downtime is astronomical. The dollars per second that this plant is generating at downtime, it was absolutely important. So he said, look, you know what? There are tools for this. Let's look at a predictive maintenance system. And that was, almost a crazy concept, crazy idea. Again, lots of colorful descriptions about how it's never going to work. And there are lots of use cases to suggest that's correct. So bringing the people in, and even from a maintenance perspective, just about the entire department, you said, no, you know, we're not going to have that computer tell us that something's working or not. I'll go check the motors the way I know how, and we'll do it. And so that was tactically, that wasn't going to work. And in implementation, we could identify tactically we're going to have a problem if the dependencies, like we talked about before, in this case, maintenance doing their role, was not going to be fully appreciated. We're going to fail. Okay, so we engaged what we call our ambassadors. We really pumped them up and said, look, you know, even if you're doing us a favor, the first time that we get an error message, I need you to respond, and you just help us out. If after that it doesn't work, you know, we'll turn it off. Okay, yeah, sure. So good. Got a couple ambassadors we trust to take care of the process, and you know, lo and behold, on first day, actually 2 hours into production, we get an alert. There's too much draw on Hamline motor, and we had one maintenance person hit the screen and said, this computer is broken. It's not working. Closes the window. Okay, that didn't work. Our maintenance ambassador said, look, you know what, I'm just gonna do what these guys asked. I'm gonna help them out. I'm gonna go get the motor. It's still running. No downtime event yet, but the alert happened, so I'm gonna go get it from parts. I'm gonna get the tools I need. I'm gonna go down to the floor, and on break, I'm just gonna change it out. So he did that. Shift change was about, took him about 20 minutes or so to just completely swap out the motor. And then he brings it back to the shop. Okay, so sort of, well, big reveal. What was going on? Was there anything? It turns out that even though it had been through run up, it had done several tests for about a month prior. By the time the predictive maintenance system, you know, was able to identify that something was going on here, when they took it apart, they found that there was a defect in the motor shaft. Had they not paid attention tactically, that human component, to what the data was saying to them, they would have had a critical failure in that plant with potentially, you know, hours of downtime. The ROI generation was, hey, very specifically, we want to be able to change motors out quickly and improve downtime. This enablement of that data, which was you know, used in a predictive way, was able to help this facility pay for the entire predictive maintenance system for the first year on day one and 2 hours into shift. And it's just, for me, always a reminder of what can happen when you bridge that specific problem to leveraging the data that you have around it and then tactically executing on what you need. Big results can happen. And so I'd like to share that story with people because it can happen in your facility tomorrow. It can happen in your facility next week. All you have to do is take a data first approach.
That's awesome. That's great, Cam. That's I mean, to realize the ROI in 2 hours basically, and then fix it over a shift. This is what can happen if you do really lean into the data first mentality part. It does take a little bit of little bit of culture shift, I bet, when you went through that whole process too, right?
Yeah, you know, it's not a install next finish and you got your result. You know, this does take the human engagement. It does take support at the top levels. It takes support at the execution level. But when you have that, there's very little stopping you from achieving your result.
Yeah, what strikes me about that story is how close it was, how close status quo or somebody not believing in it would have been to causing that downtime, right? Because that one guy said, oh, this is broken, but somebody else just said, you know what, let's just check it out. So, hey, Roger, will you go forward 2 slides? We don't have time to get to some of the questions. I appreciate everyone hanging in there for that story with us. I'm just going to wrap it up for us. Roger and Cameron, this has been fantastic. This is exactly the kind of insight that we want to bring everyone. And really the things that I'm pulling out of this a lot is that that connection of data between human data and machine data. We're just starting to scratch the surface of that, and so I'll probably be either asking you guys some questions later on, and maybe have you guys back at another Beyond Compliance later on this year. But for next week, we do have another one going on: sticky improvements, making process improvements stick. We've got our own in-house Brandon Wright going to have a couple of really cool stories about how to make process improvements actually stick around. So if you haven't, go and sign up for that. Check out the details. So with that, Roger, thank you so much for joining us, and Cam, likewise, it's been a pleasure working with both of you on Beyond Compliance. That'll do it for us. Thank you again both for joining.
Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. This is a lot of fun.
Thanks, guys.